For joining us today. So we're going to be talking about promoting engagement in small group settings across a variety of different learning modalities. So there's been some research that's been done on small groups, and more recently there was a meta-analysis that was done that shed some light on how small groups can help promote academic improvement, how small groups can help promote relationships amongst students, as well as relationships with student to instructor, and how small groups can also help promote psychological health. So the meta-analysis found that for academic improvement, that students were actually found to be better problem solvers when they were in groups, and they were able to retain that information a little bit longer. As I mentioned before, small groups help students develop better relationships amongst their peers as well as with their instructor. And this helps them develop social skills. And it's also been shown that students are more willing to share in a small group rather than in that larger group setting. And it also teaches students how not to dominate the conversation. You know, in a large group, oftentimes you have a single individual who dominates the conversation and doesn't necessarily let other students answer questions, or they're very quick to answer. Whereas in a small group setting, this allows those shyer, more introverted students to have an opportunity to voice their understanding as well. And then for psychological health, because these small groups can help promote academic improvement as well as help promoting those relationships, these small groups can also contribute to an individual's self-esteem as well, which is really important for the student to believe that they can learn what they're learning, that they can master it, and that they can retain it. That's really important in contributing to their self-beliefs.
Just one little thing to add to the small group. There's been numerous studies, I think Fay and Navarro are a couple from the early 2000s, but it's been repeated time and time again on the number that's like perfect for a small group. And time again, the number 4 comes up. So anything between that 3 to 5 range is probably a good sweet spot. But I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do we use these small group settings? Where there's actually some rationale behind why small groups can help promote achievement, relationships, and psychological health. And really what we're trying to do when we put students in a small group is we're trying to promote student learning and to motivate our students. And what this is actually accomplishing is helping create senses of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Hi, David, welcome. So when we're talking about autonomy, what we mean is the student feels like they're in control of their behavior or they're in control of their learning. So when they're in a small group setting, when we have these senses of achievement, what we're seeing is students feel like they're more responsible and they're taking on these roles of autonomy and responsibility for their own learning in this process. In terms of competence, what we mean by that is students have an understanding of the content, and that understanding that therefore then promotes that success and that advancement. And oftentimes when a student feels like they have autonomy, they also have senses of competence in what they're doing as well. And lastly, we have relatedness. And so again, we know that small groups can help build those relationships amongst students. And so this relatedness is that connection to one another. And so when we put students in these small groups and we create an environment where autonomy, competence, and relatedness can be satisfied for those students, which are often termed as psychological needs, this in turn can help promote academic achievement, as well as help build those important relationships that students need with their peers and with their instructor as well. So some big picture strategies, and this is by no means, the end all to be all list. These are just some, bigger picture ideas of how you can design your course using small groups from start to finish. Group projects are an excellent way as a big picture strategy. Peer education, where you have students teaching students. It could be students within the course. It could even be students that have previously done the course. I know that in the chemistry field, peer education or peer-led education is oftentimes what's used to help new cohorts of students work through rather difficult or advanced chemistry concepts. We also have team-based or project-based learning, which is a more bigger picture idea, a little bit bigger than a group project, whereas a group project might be a one-off event that takes place in the course, whereas project-based learning, you might have continuous projects throughout the entirety of the course to help teach the various different concepts. And then lastly, we have case studies, which are opportunities for students to apply what they've learned to new scenarios.
Just to add, I think all of these options would be great in any modality. I could see them working both virtually and in seat. And I also wanted to point out, I think a couple sessions ago, Alice and I introduced it, the concept of understanding by design by Wiggins and McTighe. And all of these can be created using that curriculum development sort of model of thinking backwards. So especially I'm looking at the project-based learning. If you're doing that course long, using understand by design will really be effective thinking about your long-term goals and how to work backwards from those.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we kind of go into some of our, suggestions, what are some strategies that you guys are using in your classrooms right now, whether face-to-face, virtual, remote, or online?
I'm trying out a couple new things. One of which is part of my scaffolded research project for the semester. I'm giving a certain amount of points for coming into office hours for a one-on-one brainstorming session. So, that kind of free flow of ideas, I think the students are left to do that on their own a lot of the time, but not having that kind of, maybe the value of an office hour visit isn't obvious that you could just come in there and brainstorm with your professor. So I'm giving some assigned points for that too. And I'm also giving them more options for their final project. So it's a paper and a project, basically analyzing the content of a music video that addresses issues of race and class in America. So the first part is a outline, which is scored, not a heavy amount of points, but kind of a scaffolded approach. Then there's that one-on-one brainstorming session, followed by a draft being due. For the presentation, they get to do a test run in class in front of their peers for peer feedback. And then they can kind of refine that for the final presentation at the end of the semester. So that way the stakes are a little bit less severe for bombing that final presentation. And they also have the option to do more than just a PowerPoint. They can do, for this case, they can write a new verse of the song. They can kind of track the inspiration of the author or the artist that made the video, or they can kind of map out some other kind of project or a podcast or something like that and pre-record it for those who are a little jittery when it comes to live presentations. So playing with those for now.
Totally great. I love that multimedia approach. I use that a lot in my own classroom, and I found that you never know what students want to come up with and how they want to show and highlight their strengths. So I think that's awesome. I also like that you're differentiating within that. So depending on the student's skill level, maybe they would be a great podcaster, but maybe they don't reflect or show their critical thinking skills as well, like on a piece of writing that you submit. So I really like the variety there. That's awesome. And I liked your idea for the one-on-one with you, because you get to see how they think. Their critical thinking skills may not, be where you want them, but you can kind of play devil's advocate and pry. And that's really cool. I like that. I'm going to definitely mention some of those ideas to others once they come along. Thank you.
Take all of it. I mean, they hit these roadblocks and it's like, I don't know where to go from here. And if they just have somebody who's already in that space, maybe it's helpful. And then the last part I do is I throw a little bit of peer review. So like that practice run of the presentation, they get peer feedback. And then the final portion, when we grade that final presentation, I actually let the students, they're responsible for half of their peers' grades. So the way it works is each student presents, they get a grade from all of their student peers. I average those out, then I give my grade, and the student's final grade is the average of my grade and their peers' grade combined. So there's a little bit of ownership over the process, and they also learn how to be critical of other people's work, which highlights what's wrong with their own projects or places where they can grow as a presenter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really sounds like you're bringing in all of those elements that we talked about, that autonomy, that competence, and that relatedness in each of these parts, which absolutely promotes that ownership for that student, which is really important. If we're trying to promote lifelong learners, we
Yeah.
have to show them how to do that. And ownership is the best way. If we can help our students own what they're learning, they're going to be more invested and more motivated in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like if you can explain to a student, this isn't a good skill just for sociology 205, but I mean, anytime you're going to deal with people and you have to share some information, this might be valuable to you later on down the line. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else before we move on? Okay. So I do have some ideas for small groups in an online modality, and then Kelsey will share some ideas for that face-to-face modality. And as David mentioned, with what he was doing in his course, incorporating a lot of that peer review and that one-on-one brainstorming, I can see how a lot of these things could translate very easily into a small group setting, or into an online group setting instead of just that face-to-face. So I think there's a lot of transferability. So just some ideas of how to incorporate small groups into the online modality. Just because students are at a distance doesn't mean that we can't still help them build that community of learners. We can do some role-playing activities. So you can assign a student a partner where they have to role play. And because it's an online setting, it's really important as the instructor to be able to view that role playing and help guide students in some of the next steps after that. So have the students record their interaction for that role play and then upload that. Discussion boards can sometimes be hit or miss, but one way to really help promote some more of that ownership in the discussion is to assign a different role to each student each week. So you could have a student who is the moderator. You could have a student whose role is to play devil's advocate. And so what they're doing during the discussion is they try to bring up a contrary point to promote that deeper thinking of the topic. Or you could have a student where their role is the connector. So they need to try and actively find where there are connections between students' responses. And so you assign a different role each week. Now, if you have a group of students in your course, maybe you have 40 students in your course, that might be a little difficult. So Canvas has this really nice feature where you can actually create smaller discussion boards with groups of students, and then that might allow for giving each student in that small group a different role for that discussion board that week. Peer reviews is another great way, and it doesn't just have to be written work. As you were describing with what you do with your students, allowing students to use multimedia and not just written work. Peer review can be a great way for students to get feedback from their peers. It also helps them develop that critical eye, that helps them learn how to critique something and not just tear something down, because they know that they're going to get some constructive criticism back as well. And then again, we can bring in those case studies where students can then apply what they've learned to other settings, and that can very easily be done in a small group setting online as well. Once again, you could set it up with a discussion board, or you can assign students. What's really nice about Canvas too is that you can actually make different pages editable. So you can allow students to edit a page on a Canvas board as well. And this might be a nice area for brainstorming those case studies or brainstorming those other ideas. You can also use, it's kind of like a Google Doc, basically. It's just housed within a single area in Canvas instead. So these are some brief ideas for small groups in the online modality.
All right. So part of my whole little piece of the project here was giving you some options for face-to-face. And I want to start off with Jigsaw because we've all heard of this, and I think this is probably one of the most used techniques at the college. But so I won't bore you in explaining what a jigsaw is, but I will say you can change up the style of your like final piece, your report out. So you could have the students create a TikTok, you could have them create a video, you could have them write a rap, like whatever sort of media that they're involved in. Instead of just telling the group this piece had this in it, you can engage them and make it more fun. One that my college professors used a lot in education was concept mapping, because so many pieces of just concepts are connected to other ones and theories and so forth. So you can break up your class into group, have them analyze and look at a concept, and then make those connections between one another. A scavenger hunt, I mentioned this one in a couple sessions ago, and Jessica Beachy really liked the idea, so I thought I'd throw it on here as well. You can plant QR codes around this college or around your classroom. That would probably get a little boring, or even outside, and have students almost do like a treasure or a scavenger hunt, scanning those codes and completing the task as they go along. It's a great way to get the students out of the classroom. It's a great way to like vary your engagement, and then keep students within groups so they have one another to try and play it off of. I've also seen people do kind of those, what are those rooms that you can go to? It's like the name is escaping me, but you're locked in a room and you have to figure out a way to get out. You can kind of create the same thing with your own content. You know, I have to figure out this piece before moving on to the next. They make these lock boxes now for educators that have a piece of the puzzle literally locked within the box, and escape rooms. Thank you, David. And as students have to figure out how to get the piece out based on the content that it's connected to. So it can be used really in any content area. Those are fun. Peer reviews can also be used in face-to-face environments. I'm sure you do this. Instead of just having the students split themselves up, you can split them up based off of interests or even differentiation abilities. But that's something to think about as you're creating these groups, not always choosing you get to pick who's ever in your group. Having some sort of forefront and thought about how these groups are picked is another way that I would look at peer reviews. The divided assignment is literally taking a huge assignment and then divvying it up into smaller pieces. And you can do that with group work. And then the last two are group-led flipped classroom lessons. So you have your students meet outside of the class, either read the content, engage with the content, and then bring it back to the full group. This could be done throughout an entire unit. It could be done throughout the course. So you really have a lot of options there. And then teach the teacher. This is probably my favorite one. I taught English, and I'm big into why did the author write the work that they did, what was happening during that time period, what was the author interested in, and you get to learn a lot about why the author made their choices within the work. So I would do a lot of timepiece projects with Teach the Teacher, where I would split the groups up, and then I would say, so you're going to focus on pop culture of the 1920s. You're going to focus on political movements of the 1920s. And then we would bring all this rich culture of the 1920s and infuse that into why Gatsby is what Gatsby is. So I'm sure you can kind of flip that into whatever content area you're into. It would work quite nicely. Do I have any questions on any of these? Okay, cool.
I do want to mention really quickly too that concept mapping is a really great way to help students see the interconnectedness of concepts, but it cannot be a one-off activity. Concept mapping is very difficult to do, especially the first time. So there's a difference between like brainstorming and concept mapping, where a lot of times it's initially used as you just write down everything you know about a topic and you put it in like bubbles and things like that. That's not necessarily concept mapping, but that's a really good place to start with concept mapping, is helping the students, okay, what do you know about this? And then from there, taking it that next step, so scaffolding it in and going, okay, how are these different pieces related to one another? And so brainstorming, the mind mapping is what they typically call it, is just writing down everything you know about a particular topic, whereas concept mapping is helping the student see the connections between different pieces of the concept and how that relates to other larger concepts within whatever field they happen to be studying. Concept mapping takes a lot of practice. I think it's an excellent tool to use. And I think it's great to help students see those interconnectedness. But it is one of those things where you have to do it and you have to do it often.
And supplying them with the concepts first. Sometimes I've had instructors create like a fishbowl of just little pieces of paper or the concepts themselves. So that way students aren't front-ending with the brainstorming piece of it, and you are pretty much leading their way with the concept. So you can, start mini steps that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of froze on me. Hold on. There we go. So
I'll go ahead.
We love, yeah, you go ahead and go.
A couple of weeks ago, I met with some former students who are all juniors in college now, and they're spread out all over the nation. And I don't think any of them are in a community college, but some of them, I had one student like from Harvard, I had one at UCLA that I met with for coffee. So I know that it's all different skills, some state schools, some like Ivy League. And we met for coffee, and I was asking them about their experiences with Zoom. And all 8 of them talked about how they were having Zoom breakout fatigue. Some of these instructors would use breakout rooms literally 8 times in a Zoom course. And they were like, we're sick of it. We're not, by the time, we're in the 6th or even 7th breakout, we just sit there. And if she pops in or he pops in, we just act like we've been talking because we're so tired of doing these breakouts. And they're like, there's got to be another way for them to know that we're engaged with the content and just like, let us move on. So this is completely anecdotal, and I don't think there's been a lot of research on this, but we know there's such thing as survey fatigue. We know that there's fatigue with a lot of these things. So maybe try and limit those opportunities for breakouts in a Zoom and make them more about what they can come back with to the group and less about just discussing things between one another. That was the main complaint. They felt like they would talk and have these rich conversations between one another. They'd get back to the group, and then the instructor would just kind of go off on their own. They didn't really get to engage with what they talked about, or it wasn't really connected all that well. So it's just something to keep in mind that I wanted to throw in here. There's no evidence to support this. There's no data on it. It's completely anecdotal, but go ahead. Oh, yes, David.
So I had the same thought. And one of the things that I do is every time I send them to a breakout, I kind of have them elect a group speaker to kind of present what their discussion was about to the class, and also a writer to type their notes into the chat for people. So that way at the end of the class, they can download the chat and have like a record of the conversation and go back and study it. So those are 2 ways to make it a little more active than I thought.
Love that. Great. And actually you saying that is a perfect segue into Allison's next piece here. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So small groups can be excellent ways to engage students, but they still have to be purposeful. And I think that's, kind of the anecdote we were trying to get at, is that if you're having students be in a small group just because you don't know what else to do with them, that's not necessarily going to be purposeful learning for the student. And so I hypothesize that what some of Kelsey's former students were experiencing was the instructor uses think, pair, share a lot in the classroom and is trying to simulate think, pair, share in a remote setting via Zoom. And there's not a lot of connectedness there. And so we want to be purposeful in our group work and why we group students up to then perform a task or to think about something. But we know that students don't often like doing group work. We always have students that say, I would rather work by myself because I always end up feeling like I do all the work. I've been there too, where I've been in the student setting and I've said, I don't want to work with anybody because I don't want to have to shoulder the entire project myself. If I'm going to do that, I would rather just do it on my own and not have to share the credit. So one interesting way that an instructor I worked with previously was able to kind of overcome this and prevent one person from taking it all on, because sometimes you might have a small group where other students want to do the work, but then they have an individual that tends to dominate the entire group as well. And that's also not productive. So one of the ways that the instructor did this to help overcome one student dominating and to spread the work out evenly amongst the students was to create what she called a group work agreement form. And I actually have that form that I'm going to share with you guys. So this is what it looks like. And so before the group work even begins,
We're not seeing that.
Oh, they're not. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to catch up before.
Yeah. Let me share. How about now?
Got it.
Okay. So before the group work even begins, the instructor would have the group fill out this agreement. So the group would know what the project is that they're going to be working on and who the members are, and they would essentially think through what would we need to do in order to complete this project. So what they would do before they would even begin the work on the project is they would list the members of the group, and then they would write out who was responsible for each task and what's the deadline for that task. And what this essentially does is this creates a contract amongst the students within the group and with the instructor before the work even begins, so that everyone is on board, everyone knows what they're responsible for, and they have some agreed upon deadlines for those items as well. You know, sometimes you get to a point with whatever the group is working on, and they can't move on to the next step because they've got an individual that they're still waiting on to do their, to present their contribution. And so this helps essentially create a timeline and map out what's needed in order to complete the project and the timeline for the project to do that as well. Something else that the instructor also added, because this was in a remote/online class that this took place, the instructor also included a piece where the group members had to indicate how they were going to communicate with one another and how frequently they were going to communicate. So were they going to meet via Zoom? Were they going to meet on Google Hangout? Were they just going to contribute to a Google Doc? Were they going to text? Were they going to use a discussion board? The group members had to decide then and there how they were going to communicate with each other and how frequently they were going to do that as well. And by also deciding that as a group and then communicating that with the instructor, that helped create some parameters of how this work was going to occur in this online setting. And they found this to be pretty effective.
One thing I wanted to point out is everything we've mentioned, there is a little bit of work involved in the beginning, in the forefront of it. And I think instead of trying to apply something new and jazzy and sexy and cool to every single unit or lesson that you do, think about the areas in your current curriculum that could use a spruce, that could use more engagement. This entire series has been how to best engage students with the resources and the data that we have. And this is something that Allison has come across, and it's worked in the past. So think about the areas of your class right now that you're like, I like this assignment, but it could use just something different. I could add an element to help students be more engaged with the content here. So we're not asking you to completely redesign your entire course and infuse all of these cool tons of front-loaded work things in them, but do think about the engagement that's happening in your class and really assess whether or not it's what you're looking for.
I have a quick question. How do you suggest handling the grading? So my challenge is always, I don't want to give a group grade and then someone gets a grade without doing anything and someone gets a grade for doing all of nothing, and then somebody's in the middle. So I'm thinking about defaulting to you have required group work, but you're going to be graded individually. But then that disincentivizes the group work part of it. So how do you any thoughts on how do you manage the grading criteria and how do you incentivize group work? Because there's value in it without having someone being penalized for not picking up or picking up too much of the share, not picking up enough of it.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question. I think that's something that every instructor will struggle with forever. I think something that might help is this group work agreement that I'm showing you guys right now kind of helps delineate the tasks. And so, they're going to submit this to the instructor and the instructor can go, hey, wait a minute, Jane is doing, all of the literature review for this project. And then Billy is just writing the references. That's not an equal share. And so the purpose of this is to help kind of create that level playing field of students doing the work. Something that I would do when I would have students work on group projects in my courses was I would have the students privately write down their contributions, write down their partners' contributions, and then tell me what grade they believed that they deserved and what grade that they believed their partners deserved. Often this was pretty illuminating because it let me know if there was a problem, but it let me know privately. Nobody had to come to me and feel like they were, being a snitch or being a rat or, not playing nice with others. So this let me kind of see the dynamic of the group and how people felt, how things were fair or not. I personally don't necessarily like doing group grades, but I do take into account that there is, I obviously am doing this for a reason. And usually it's because it's a large project and it's a little bit easier to do in that group setting because you have more minds trying to tackle the problem.
Yeah, that's great. Like the check-ins, right? And the frequency of the check-ins, I think work. Can I get your thoughts on something I just tried? So instead of giving a group grade for the presentation, right? Everyone gets graded on their 5 minutes of the presentation, for example. But the group that has the best presentation gets a little bit of a bonus point at the end of the semester. So like they present and then their peers will vote which one was the most, and I'll give them like a rubric, the most engaging, best use of content, best pacing, all of that stuff. So they have the potential to earn points based on a good group presentation, but they don't lose anything. They're not penalized for it. At the end of the day, what do y'all think about that as an option?
I like that idea. I just want to say I would do that more than once because to make it a true carrot and something that they work towards, I don't think I would be motivated as your student if it was just one time. Like I only get one opportunity to impress him. So if you're going to do that, I maybe would offer it more than that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is this model that Allison has. Creating a robust rubric that explains and delineates all of these tasks is really one of the core and major things that you need to create before this is done. And so students understand what's expected of them and how much each of these tasks are worth. And I've effectively used, I had a group grade that was worth, 40% of the grade, but their personal contribution based off of something like this was 60% of the grade. So that way it was still both, but it was really their personal contribution that was the most of it. So I did want to put that in there as well. Allison, I'll let you.
Mm-hmm. No, and I agree with all of those things. And I think that's great what you're doing in your course is allowing some of that bonus. I think it needs to be, just like Kelsey said, more than just a one-off. Not only to help improve motivation, but to also feel more fair to the student. I think students could easily walk away from that situation and go, well, he just didn't like me. And so because it was a one-off thing. So it's great that it doesn't penalize, but if you're going to, I've always viewed, if you're going to allow bonus, you have to give multiple opportunities for that so that students don't feel like they're being treated unfairly in those little rewards. For whatever reason, students tend to put more emphasis on bonus than they do the actual points. And if they feel like they're not getting something extra and they don't have enough opportunities to earn that something extra, it can actually be demotivational instead of motivational.
I had an instructor say what's fair is not always equal, and what equal isn't always fair. And so I think that kind of goes into that too. And you really have to think about that statement, like what to get it. But I think that example kind of points to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions or any other ideas? Like this is a great place to bounce off ideas that you might have that you've been thinking about trying too.
Well, maybe one other question. I've been trying to think about what engagement looks like in different ways in virtual classes for students who have expected to be in person, right? Because we're still kind of doing this remote work, and I'm having a few students who are struggling with just staying like in the moment with Zoom. And I don't want to boil engagement down to just you have your camera on, because there's lots of reasons why people don't have their cameras on, and having your camera on doesn't actually mean you're paying attention either. So I don't know, any thoughts on just different things I could look for that could signal engagement beyond typing something in the chat or you know, the obvious like looking into your camera, which I don't know if that even counts all the time.
Pick me. One thing that I have just loved when instructors do are guided notes. So like you create, 5 topics or 5 questions, and you're going to answer those questions during the Zoom. But if they didn't catch it and didn't get the answer, then I mean, what are they going to do? So I've seen some instructors hold off on posting their recording until, they get the due date or whatever for the guided notes. And then they'll post the recording to go back. But it's also good for you as an instructor because you can see what parts, flourished and what parts students were confused upon in the concepts that you had them list out. So that's one way for an automatic, like I know students are engaged because of these guided notes. Again, a little bit of pre-work from you, but it does kind of ensure that.
Another idea is doing an exit ticket and having students, in order to get, maybe like 2 participation points or maybe even put the carrot of you'll get a bonus point that can be applied to an exam or to a project or whatever, is posing a question as an exit question and having students, in order to earn that, be able to put their thoughts in the chat before they leave. I would make sure that it is not a yes or no question. It's got to be a question that provides some explanation, because yes or no questions, if you ask them, did you understand everything today? Everybody is going to say yes. So it would be better to ask a question of, whatever topic that you're talking about, say, like, can you explain this to a 5-year-old? How would you explain this to a 5-year-old? And then that also lets you know where did my instruction miss some students, and that lets you know what you need to follow up with your next session or what supplemental material you might need to provide them with to fill in those gaps as well.
You could do recall with that too. So using 2 of the concepts that I discussed in class today, I would like you to explain to me your favorite blah, blah, blah. So you're asking them to recall from the course and infuse it with their own personal, something that they just can't take from other students.
Mm-hmm. And again, by infusing it with that personal thing, you are invoking that autonomy.
All right, thank you.
Anything else we can help you guys with? And of course, we're always available. Just, email us. We can set up a Zoom consultation, whatever it is you guys might need, we're here.
I have another question. There's this, is it true that there's like this one button streaming studio room somewhere on campus?
There is.
What's it like? And can I take a look at it at some point? How do I do that?
one of us can meet you there. Do we have keys for it, Kelsey?
Yes. Yeah, there's actually it's really self-serving. So once we're allowed to return back to campus, we would literally let you in the room, and it's I don't want to say like we wouldn't show you how to use it. It's just literally that self-explanatory. Like you open up the folder and it's step by step how to go with it, how to use it. It's a really cool feature. Like if I was a podcaster, I would totally use this equipment. If I wanted to create some really like cool, engaging like PowerPoints or videos or something that I would use time and time again, I would definitely use the One Button Studio. But it's so simple to use. We'd be happy to show you how and let you just play with it and see how you could use it for your own classes. So after February 7th, we will definitely do that with you.
Okay, so yeah, because I've been teaching from my home office, and it's like it's not the greatest, with even like things like lighting and space. So if you can live cast something from there, that might be a little easier just to come in.
It's got like this really expensive, it looks like like a blanket essentially, and it's for sound, and then there is professional lighting in there. So if you're an Instagram model, you would like it too. But yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. And I think you'd probably be one of the first, if not the first instructor to use it. And we've had the equipment since the pandemic started. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you know.
Cool.
Whenever you're on campus, I'll be around to stop in and check it out, because I think I want to get in there a little bit.
Yeah, awesome. We would love if you did.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we are going to post this recording and the group work agreement and any other resources that we thought would be helpful. We do post those to the Keep Teaching site. So if you don't have access to that, then let me know. But it's really easy to get to. You just scroll all the way down to it's at the very last part of it. But the recording should be up soon along with the resources.
Thanks for everything. This was good.
Thank you.
I'm glad I got a chance to get to campus on time to make it. So
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Well, thank you guys for joining us. And again, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. We're here.
Will do.
Bye. I think that went really well.
It did. You want to go ahead and stop record?